Welcome everyone to my first podcast of Gems and Jokes. My name's Arieltivon and I'm the owner of Tivon Fine Jewellery. But that's not what this podcast is really about. We'll get to that part. I guess you're wondering what it is all about, and hopefully it will be interesting enough to carry on listening and you don't find that it's more boring than watching paint dry. So let's get going. Well, I guess the main reason I am doing this podcast is, well, mainly for me, actually. It's a kind of therapy. My brain, unfortunately, always swims with different information, and I'm trying to get it out. It's free therapy, and hopefully at the same time, it will be very educational for you guys, for the listeners, and there'll be a lot of information about gems, about jewellery, the whole background, different parts of the industry. And at the same time, I thought, well, if I'm going to be doing this educational format for teaching all about gems and jewellery, why not also try and make a difference? Through that, I think we're going to be able to help some great charities and some great causes along the way. We're going to have some amazing guests, some interesting guests, and all of them, you'll have a chance to listen and to help them with their charities. Over the coming weeks, you're going to find out why I've called this segment Gems and Jokes, is because, well, we're going to have a laugh. We're going to have some great times with guests, and we're going to have some education here, but we're not going to take this too seriously. This isn't, a professor standing in front of a microphone giving a lecture. We're going to have some fun along the way. We're going to have some great jokes, and we're going to have a laugh together. And that's the main thing. I hope to bring you some great entertainment. So first, let me tell you a little bit about my family history and how we got to this point in time. So the whole thing started back in 1963, where my dad started in Israel as a diamond cutter. Now, a diamond cutter, for those who don't know, is the guy who takes the rough material, the rough diamond, and then removes the sort of outer shell, the outer crust, and gives it shape. I mean, he always loved doing that, but he describes the work sort of with very ambivalent kind of emotion. On the one hand, he absolutely loved it, but on the other hand, he always describes it as absolutely back-breaking work because he was on his feet for 16 hours a day. And it's kind of like, when you listen to the old people tell those stories, in my day, we used to trudge through 3 miles of snow to get to this, and we stood for the whole day and we weren't allowed. And it's kind of like that, listening to my dad a lot of the time. A lot of my dad's stories remind me about that classic Monty Python skit. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's called the Four Yorkshiremen, where these four guys get together and pretty much, wax lyrical about how tough they had it as kids and how tough their upbringing was. Just have a listen to this. This is pretty much sums up a lot of my dad's stories.
You were lucky to have a room. We used to have to live in the corridor. Oh, we used to dream of living in a corridor. Would have been a palace to us. We used to live in an old water tank on a rubbish tip. We got woke up every morning by having a load of rotting fish dumped all over us. House?
Well, when I say house, it was just a hole in the ground covered by a sheet of tarpaulin, but it was a house to us.
We were evicted from our hole in the ground. We had to go and live in a lake. You were lucky to have a lake. There were 150 of us living in a shoebox in the middle of the road. Cardboard box? Aye, you were lucky. We lived for 3 months in a rolled-up newspaper in a septic tank. We used to have to get up every morning at 6 o'clock and clean the newspaper, go to work down the mill, 14 hours a day, week in, week out, for 6pence a week. And when we got home, our dad would thrash us to sleep with his belt. Luxury. We used to have to get out of the lake at 3 o'clock in the morning, clean the lake, eat a handful of hot gravel, work 20 hours a day at mill for 2pence a month, come home and Dad would beat us around the head and neck with a broken bottle if we were lucky. Well, of course, we had it tough. We used to have to get up out of the shoebox in the middle of the night and lick the road clean with our tongues. We had to eat half a handful of freezing cold gravel, work 24 hours a day at mill for 4pence every 6 years, and when we got home, our dad would slice us in two with a bread knife.
Right. I had to get up in the morning at 10 o'clock at night, half an hour before I went to bed. Eat a lump of coal poison, work 29 hours a day down mill and pay mill owner for permission to come to work, and when we got home, our dad would kill us and dance about on our grave singing hallelujah.
And you try and tell the young people of today that, and they won't believe you. No, they won't.
In any case, so he started the whole thing, and at some point he found that it wasn't enough. My dad was always a very ambitious sort of guy, and after fighting in several wars, he had also kind of had enough. And fortuitously, a friend of his lived in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and invited him over for a holiday. So my dad took him up on the offer, and he traveled to Zimbabwe. And at the same time, he thought, well, let me also see South Africa. And of course, you know, that was the stars aligning. He visited South Africa, fell absolutely in love with South Africa, and at the same time saw amazing opportunity. So he started, for the next few years, he started traveling back and forth from Israel to South Africa, selling diamonds, selling jewellery, also selling bespoke silverware. And at some point, I guess he felt that, you know, South Africa just was the place to settle. So then a few months after I was born, in 1976, he decided to make the commitment, and he packed up the family and moved us permanently to South Africa. And that's where the second chapter, I suppose, of the story really starts. So I guess it should be told how I came into this business. Well, when I was 4 years old, my dad, who pretty much always frowns upon idleness, brought me into his office, sat me in the corner, gave me some antique silverware, polishing cloth, and put me to work. And he said, you know, get cleaning. And back then, there was no PC brigade, there was no child labor laws and people jumping up and down saying, back then, it was teaching your child a skill. I can't say I remember those times with great fondness in terms of the actual cleaning of the silver, because I can still kind of smell the sort of horrible, acrid smell of the polishing liquid. But I can say this, and it's kind of been a lifelong thing. What I did love was the pleasure that I saw my father take in the fact that I did a half decent job, and you know, he gave me this sort of what perceivably was dirty silverware, and after hours and hours of sitting there polishing it, I presented him a nice shiny candlestick or whatever it was, and he was extremely pleased. So for me, it started out there. It was simply just making my dad proud. So at this point, I should probably say how I got into the business itself. I'd love to wax lyrical and say that it was, you know, love at first sight and great family tradition, and that I was going to get into gems and jewellery. But actually, the truth was very, very different. Certainly was not that. As typical kid, all I was interested in sort of kid stuff, and even throughout my teenage years, you know, very, very different interests. But I guess in a kind of, let's call it a Mr. Miyagi, Daniel-san way, my father always sort of gave me tasks along the way. Things that I had no clue what the point of them was, but I guess somehow my dad knew that they would serve me well at some point. Maybe I should be at least grateful to him that, you know, the whole Mr. Miyagi thing wasn't me being kicked in the head or having to wax a car or paint the fence. But really, it kind of came to a head when I was around 15, 16 years old. And my dad said to me, we're going to Thailand. Now, my dad was quite used to going to Thailand. He pretty much went at least once or twice a year because he was always buying gemstones out there. Asia is a very rich place for gemstones, and Thailand is one of the hubs. So he used to go there, and this time he said, come along. Of course, I typically thought, well, great, this is going to be a free holiday. I get to sit by the pool. I get to, you know, eat hamburgers and drink drinks and just soak up the sun and maybe go on a couple of tours. But I was in for a very rude awakening. There was no sitting by the pool, and there certainly was no sipping drinks. So one day we get there, and my dad says to me, right, we are going to work. And I'm like, who's we? And he said, no, you're coming with me to choose gemstones today. So we arrive at this pretty much nondescript, tiny little office block in the center of Bangkok. And I look at this place and I'm thinking, like, where on earth are we? Because this is not what I had in mind. I had imagined this sort of regal, posh kind of building, you know, plush offices and so on. But this was so far from it. I mean, it literally almost looked like a ramshackle kind of building. Pretty sad, really. And all I could think about was, I want to go back to the hotel and sit by the pool. But anyway, so we walk in and my dad exchanges pleasantries with the owner of the business. I'm walking through and, you know, just taking in the sights, pretty drab surroundings, as I said. And this assistant comes through, very soft-spoken, sort of timid character. The owner sort of says something to him in Thai and he wanders off. And a couple of minutes later, he returns carrying this big stack of trays. And I'm thinking, okay, this looks interesting. What's this all about? And then they started opening the trays. And I have to say, I can say that at that point, something magical happened because I'd never really embraced the jewelry world. I'd never really taken that much of an interest in what my dad did. But when they opened those trays and revealed what was inside, I can say those are one of the few moments of awe in my lifetime, because these were absolutely spectacular. I mean, there were all kinds of gemstones. The colors were just magnificent. You had blues, pinks, yellows, greens. I mean, it was a brand new world. So at first, obviously, I'm taking this in and thinking this is fabulous. But of course, my dad had other things in mind. In other words, his son was actually going to try and do a decent day's work. So he hands me a pair of tweezers, jeweler's tweezers, and a jeweler's loop, which is the special eyeglass that a jeweler uses to look into the gemstones, where pretty much all the secrets of the gemstones are revealed when you look into it. And he then, for about 10-15 minutes, teaches me how to hold the gemstones quite tightly between the tweezers and how to look into the gemstone. And I'm thinking, okay, I think I've got this. I'm not 100% sure, but let's give it a go. So he showed me how to use these tools, and I thought, okay, I think I've got the swing of things. And he then, gave me a tray and said, start looking at these gemstones. And I have to say, this was not, a quick excursion. We pretty much sat there the whole day, and I was absolutely terrible at the job. I kept on dropping stones. My eyes at the end of the day felt like I had literally been watching 48 hours of straight TV. About an inch from the screen, my eyes were on absolute fire from having to squint and to look through the eyeglass for the first time, and it was just horrendous. It was torture. And at that point, I thought, well, is this really for me? Already, I was sort of trying to back out. Typical, once again, Mr. Miyagi sort of thing. After you finish painting all the fences, it's now time to wax all the cars. So that's end of day one. Of course, next morning we wake up, starts day two. And I'm thinking, come on, today we've got to sit by the pool. I'm sure we did more than enough the day before. But of course, off we march to yet another office and another nondescript sort of building. And once again, the trays were brought out with these absolutely gorgeous gems. This time, the challenge was a little bit bigger. So my father hands me this stack of trays, and he says, by now, obviously, he thinks that I've sort of gotten the hang of holding the tweezers, holding the gems, looking through the loop. And he says to me, right, today we're selecting for a very special collection, and pretty much you've got to go through all these gemstones. Now, we're talking about hundreds of gemstones, and time is precious. We're not there forever. We've got a day to do this job. And he says, right, when you finish checking them, put all the bad ones on the left, put all the good ones on the right. So sounds pretty simple. So I get started, and we're sitting there for hours. He's checking his pile, I'm checking my pile. And literally after several hours, he comes back to my table and he sees this giant pile of perceivably bad stones sitting on the left, and this very minuscule tiny pile on the right-hand side which are supposed to be the good ones. And he thinks like, this guy is never going to make it. This is a special kid. He's not going to get the swing of things because he's obviously just rejected everything. So he gave me the benefit of the doubt. He started checking some samples. He took a few out and started selecting one by one, checking them. And probably after about the 15th or 20th stone, he kind of just gave me a look and put it down. And my dad is not one for many words, and anybody who's ever met him will testify to this. All he said was, "You're right." That was it. There was no pat on the back. There was no special accolades, no sort of fanfare. You're right. That's all I got. And I have to say, at some point I did kind of spot him smirking a little bit to himself. And I think he kind of did take pride in the fact that I got the swing of things and that I had done a good job. And once again, same experience that I had when I was 4 years old with polishing the silverware. Making my father proud was worth it. It was just worth everything. So most jewelers have some sort of qualification. What I mean by that is typically people find their passion and they decide that they're going off to study gemology and they're going to study the art of making jewelry and so on. But actually the next few years, again, I didn't take that path. As any good Jewish father will tell you, his son may not be the most special kid on earth, so he better have something to fall back on. So off I went to study business and accounting and auditing. I worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers for several years and can't say that I was great at it. I think I was okay. I always loved speaking to people. I got on very well with everybody in the management, but I can't say that I was exactly the best auditor, not exactly a sleuth. And I'll tell you a great story which typifies this. So pretty much early on in my accounting articles, I got sent to an industrial company. Let's call it that. I don't want to say too much about them. But anyway, I was in charge of checking the bank reconciliations. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And the reason I hated it was that the lady who was in charge of the bank reconciliations was an absolute chain smoker. I mean, I don't think I ever saw her without a cigarette in her hand. So it was pretty much me against dying from secondhand smoke. That was the challenge. And also she used to drone on and on about how she used to frequent this casino and that casino, and I had absolutely no interest. Anyway, I think I just sort of got through the job. Anyway, about a year later, it came out that actually this very same lady who was in charge of the bank reconciliations had been embezzling thousands and thousands from the business to feed her gambling habit. So not exactly great detective work on my part. Really a failure. So I guess maybe I, after all, was not destined to be an auditor. Plus, I was always a lot more creative. And so then, the path took me in a different direction. Well, then I finished my articles at the end of 2002, and at that point I got married to my longtime girlfriend, who is now still my wife and also works with me in the business. But that is going to be another topic of another episode, how to work with your wife and survive it. And so shortly after we get married, my wife says to me, obviously the honeymoon period is kind of over, and at some point we must have had a tiff, and she said to me, well, stick it where the sun don't shine. And well, I took her very literally. So off we went to the UK where the sun doesn't shine, and we immigrated here. And we decided to expand the business and to start seeing what we can do in the UK. We thought it was going to be a grand adventure. We thought we were going to travel. We thought we were going to do all kinds of things. But building a business, as any entrepreneur will tell you, is a very different road. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of dedication. And it doesn't actually leave that much free time. So, of course, nothing goes smoothly at the beginning. the first thing I do is borrow 20 rings from my dad to start off the business in the UK. We knew no one. We didn't have any contacts, any connection, any knowledge of anything that happened in the UK. All I had, I guess, was my ambition to build the business, borrow the 20 rings, and I hit the road. I did it the old-fashioned way. I went cold calling, knocking on doors, and I have to say I absolutely hated it. It was really soul-sucking work, and that's no disparaging the industry, but from a person coming from a country which has endless sunshine and blue skies to certainly the first few months was, cold and dark and getting used to the UK weather, it was very difficult at the beginning. So on I pushed and on I tried, and on, you can only move in a forward direction. And thank God I had, my father in my corner and my wife in my corner pushing me and prodding me on. And, 2 depressions later, the first 2 years were hell of a hard. We finally sort of had a break, and I spotted the niche that I was most passionate about and I wanted to go into, and the rest is history. Once I found that niche, I went into it headstrong, and we became specialists. And I have to say that what I had in mind certainly didn't pan out the way I had it in mind. I guess that's life. It sort of writes itself and takes you in a very different direction. So then it brings me to kind of how I define myself. How do I define my role? And I guess, on the face of it, you could certainly say, well, he's a jeweler. He sells gemstones and he sells jewellery. But the truth is, it takes time. I guess with age comes hopefully a little bit of wisdom, and certainly time brings that. And I kind of have redefined my role several times over the years. I now see myself as, I think what defines a lot of my character, I'm a people pleaser. I like making people happy. And so rather when people say sort of, what do you do? I do obviously say that I do jewellery, but actually my real objective is making people happy. That's my role. And if I can do that, well, that's the true payoff. Through the course of the following weeks, you're going to discover a lot about what we do and how we do it, and what different thoughts are about it. But I'd probably say at this point, what you will see is where my true passion lies are the gemstones that we pick, why they're different, why they are exquisite in every way, because that is honestly where my passion lies. I love color. I love colored gemstones. I love all the different facets, and I love all the creativity that comes out of it. That's where my passion really lies. So I hope I haven't bored you to tears, and I hope you learned a little bit of something about my history and about the history of the business. We'll obviously be divulging a little bit more in the coming weeks, and I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope that you tune in again. If you did enjoy today's podcast, please leave a comment, please recommend us or share it with a friend, and if there's anything specific that you want to know more about, or you have any specific questions, please do comment below, and I'll do my best to come back to you personally, or possibly make it a topic of conversation in the coming weeks. Have an awesome day, and thank you so much for listening.